February 3rd, 12:45, I call to order the special call Census 2020 Redistricting Committee and Joint Committee of the Whole. I'd like to thank all of the council members that are present. Our committee members are Councilor Pro Tem Smitherman, Councilor Hunter Williams, and I'm also thankful to all of the councils. We almost have a full house here today as part of the Committee of the Whole, so we thank you. I would like to do a roll call, and so I see that everyone is in attendance except at this time, Councilor Pro Tem Smitherman. So for the record, we have 8 councilors present. Did you get that, Mr. Brown? Okay. At this time, I'd like to call for an adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Second. In favor? Aye. All right. At this time, I'd also like to ask the committee members for a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting of January 18th.
So moved.
And I second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you, councilors, for approving those minutes. As far as our new business, again, I want to welcome everyone in attendance. I do see we do have some guests also in the chamber. Today is the second meeting of the Redistricting Committee. And part of our agenda today is to present the proposed redistricting data maps. For everyone's information, we have taken the census information from the last census, and it is the responsibility of the City Council to select and set those districts, and they would become useful during the 2025 election or if there's a special election during that time. We did entertain consultants who have worked with us to come up with this redistricting map and the presentation of it today. So I would like to introduce to our audience Attorney Kareem Creighton of Crimcard Consulting. We want to thank Mr. Creighton, Dr. Creighton, and Doug Turner for the work that they have done on our map. And so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Creighton, and any introductions you'd like to make, and just give us a little steps of what's gone at this point forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate the warm welcome and am thankful to all of you all for being so cooperative and helpful during the last week, getting to know about you and your districts. As the President mentioned, I'm Kareem Creighton. I manage Crimcard Consulting and have done redistricting across the country, and I'm delighted to do this project in my home state. It's good to see some of you in person also for the first time. I want to introduce my colleague, Doug Turner, whom many of you all know. Doug has handled some of the technical aspects of the process. You all have met with him as well as with me. And Doug will sort of start us off in talking about the map that's being presented to you. But I want to just offer just a couple of comments early on just to talk about the road that we've gotten to get here. Just to remind everyone, we met separately with each one of the members of the council, both to get to know about you all after having you all seen some of the results of the census that we provided showing the population shifts, to talk to you a little bit about your thoughts on sort of possible ways in which the shifts that need to occur by law could be accommodated on the map. We took those conversations and we took notes on each one of those conversations and tried to pull together a synthesis of that and represent it in a map. This is sort of the synthesis of it that takes into account, of course, your thoughts as well as the guidelines that were adopted that both take into account the governing law, which requires, among other things, equally populated districts, but then also attention to other factors like communities of interest, compactness, and the like. So I will have more to say later, but I think it might be a good opportunity now to turn the mic over to Doug, who can talk us through the results of that synthesized process of getting districts that are compliant with law and do what we think is compliant with the guidelines. Doug, is this an okay time to switch? Yes, I shall pass it to you.
Hello. Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you. It has been a real pleasure to work on this here, quite honestly. And okay, sorry.
Just a little bit, yes.
I said it has been a real pleasure working with you. Okay, I mean, so yes, I would like that on the on the record. I know that each time we do one of these electronically, the colors don't show up quite as contrasted as they do in printed versions. So this is the draft that, working over the last several days, we've constructed to take into account all of the different the plan that was adopted. I think not only by the committee, but I think it was adopted by the council. Right? I don't want to speak out of turn, but in terms of what the priorities would be and the factors to be considered here are, as Kareem said, the overriding part of this is that we have to get the 9 districts based upon the 2020 census, and good time to say that we didn't make these numbers. They came from the 2020 census, to be roughly one person, one vote, which is the standard. And the committee adopted a plus or minus 5 ultimately, so between 105% of the perfect district and 95% of the perfect district, which has met, Kareem, I have no idea, but countless tests in court, particularly of a small government. So this has, we proceeded pretty rapidly. We knew that at the time, districts 8 and 9 were lacking population based upon a perfect district, which I think Birmingham had 200,733 people. This is based on total population as of the 2020 census. So that then gave us our perfect district. I'm going to take a second because I think this is going to be a question that a lot of you have of why do I have this dangling this or that somewhere, particularly as it relates to neighborhoods. There are a little over 9,000 census blocks that are inside the city of Birmingham. Everybody's familiar with the census tract. Well, a census tract is huge compared to a census block. So there's a census tract. They then have block groups, and most especially they have blocks. So there's not a block that's outside the city of Birmingham and inside the city of Birmingham. They literally account for every square inch of the country, and the blocks are done in a way that they respect every geography that the census department reviews. So if there are over 9,000, I mean, keep in mind that would mean any given district here has 1,000+ blocks in it, right? In particular regard to the neighborhoods, which is something that the council adopted to do kind of a best fit, if possible. The boundaries of the neighborhoods, I don't know when they were done, to be honest with you. I mean, but they really predate certainly 2010, 2000, 1974. So there are a number of times that a given census block isn't going to be within a single neighborhood as Birmingham has defined it. Why we have to use census blocks and not just kind of a meets and bounds is because only for census blocks do we know how many people live there. It's the reporting unit of the Census Department. It breaks it down by voting age population and total population. It breaks it down by ethnicity and by race. So if we tried to split a block, we would literally have to guess at how many people were on one side of the block or the other. That's not an acceptable standard, and I think even Birmingham's own ordinance requires that census geography here at the block be used as the way that the council adopts a redistricting plan. So there are going to be some oddities in that. And I've got a layer of the blocks here to show you why the block is that. So I'm sure if you've all looked at this map, particularly on your phones, as I assume many of you do, which you can do, it's a good thing, but I mean, it's also you're really getting to a tiny part of it. We want to be able to show you where that block and the need to respect the block, because it's where we have the population, has to win out over a perfect boundary as defined in the neighborhoods. Does anybody have any questions about that before we go forward with this? Because
Councilors, if you have questions, just be sure that you're noted by the dais. So,
Sorry.
Councilor Moore.
Yeah, I was just saying, could you repeat that part again?
yeah, so if a block is crosses a neighborhood boundary line, we have to respect the block because it's the only way we know how many people live there. And so you might see lots of little, you might call them divots, one way or the other here against neighborhood lines. It just means that in almost every case, that the block didn't line up with the neighborhood line that was done in 1974. So that's going to be a lot.
Councilor Moore, yes.
And one other question, is there a way for us to be able to see the census blocks also?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, in this link, spreading a little, give me just a moment to reconfigure the way this screen is up here. Might run it off that. So, and I don't know how well this is going to show up on a phone. It does show up pretty well on a browser that anyone can get to here. We have different layers here, and this is kind of like you think of in the olden days. You might have had like a cellophane, overprint of it, and I'll lay this one down, take this one out, because if you put everything up at once, it's just as confusing as can be. I mean, it's just mishmash. So, what this can do to your question is that. Sorry, I'm gonna. Going to be blocks. So let's go and you have to. Okay, as we get really down to it, see the gray lines within it. Now this doesn't pop up by default on the link you have, but it is available to you as in the side. That's it's under layers. It's under layers.
But we will have a legend. I know a lot of councilors are looking it up electronically as we speak. So you say it's under layers, as that would be the way that you would be able to
yes,
filter.
Yes, ma'am. That's absolutely right. You can drill down to the blocks here, which are shadowed. You have to zoom in some because again, 9,000 of them. But I'm gonna, if it's okay, I'm gonna turn that one off for the run through of the map that we did.
Any questions? I think everybody now is just trying to
great.
get their hands on the
Since that's probably the answer to a lot of the questions, I just wanted to cover that perhaps in too much detail early on. Okay. Close the layers. Right.
Okay.
If you're having a problem with it showing up, I'll look at that after this in terms of.
Yes, there does seem to be some difference in nuances between the computer and an actual cell device.
Very good. I understand.
Thank you.
So we did conform, and I'm going to let Dr. Creighton speak to this. Within one person, one vote, we, in areas where we could, I mean, we had 1 and 2 were substantially overpopulated versus the ideal population. As I said, 8 and 9 needed to gain the most. I think 4 needed to gain. And so we tried, in the spirit of the council's directives, in terms of the overall, to maintain neighborhoods where possible, maintain the central core, if you will, of the districts as they existed, which is a fairly common thing here, to beyond all else, first and foremost, and I will let Dr. Creighton speak just to this, to make certain that whatever the draft was and whatever the final is, complied with federal legislation. You know, voting rights amendment, I'm going to let you speak to all of those things. I'm just going to go through the map here. Again, there's a 9 needed to pick up. There's also a layer in here, by the way, that shows the old boundary lines versus what's been drawn here. It's kind of hard if you throw it in there with the neighborhoods too, but it's available as a layer. This might be a good example, and I'm sorry, I'm not sure how many different people are watching and how they can see at this is such that it will let you both search for an individual address, and as you scroll in, it lets you get down to houses and streets and all that, which is why we couldn't print a paper map this large, where you literally can look at it at, Reverend Abraham Woods Jr. Boulevard versus, well, okay, those are not residences, right? But it helps you look at any given district that way. I don't know if it's, Madam Chair, if it's productive to go through changes made to each one. I'll be glad to do it if you wish for me to.
I do want to be sure that each counselor has just that narrative or just the overview of what may have happened once the one-on-one and what the map actually looks like. Yes, please. And
Kareem, I may need you to help on this in making some of these explanations, if you can be. Back out here just a bit. That's too much. Apologies, and we'll just do them. Again, District 1, scroll up a bit to get obvious. Oh, no. Scroll up. I usually do this with a mouse and not holding a microphone, as you all can probably tell. So, I mean, District 1, as will be true with many districts, has, Birmingham's, it's not like we're doing Colorado here, right? It's not like some perfect square. There are areas on really 4 sides here that are where they have both incorporated and unincorporated parts of the city. It's really not feasible for anyone but the council district that already has that to take those. That's going to be true in districts 1, 2, 9, and 7, I believe. Here, again, this is not a change to the upper part. The district was overpopulated, and therefore we used parts of Roebuck here to primarily to further populate District 4 that was somewhat underpopulated. Okay, Roebuck's a really big geographic neighborhood, really big, and so when we had to cut neighborhoods, we tried to find logical dividing lines, because we heard more than one story of, like, didn't know that was in this district, because logically it should have been, there was a major thoroughfare or river. So we tried to look for those in doing this, again, while respecting blocks. One takes in a very, very small amount here of Liberty Highlands that had previously been in 2. District 2 which again is overpopulated at the time, gained and all of these kind of oddities. The Crestwood South neighborhood, again, trying to bring as much of that neighborhood into a single district as possible. This is where some of the blocks get really odd, I'll tell you. But, I mean, the population center here clearly is the Overton neighborhood, which is essentially those who live Southtown, Shelby County, the very border there, through Highway 280 and 119. Again, realistically, it can't go to another district here. I mean, this is just where it's bordered. Where some because District 2 was overpopulated here, we primarily went into the Southeast Lake neighborhood to take some population away from it. In 3, which because 3 had some of the South Crestwood, we squared up. Let me get in a little closer on this. I'm sorry. Now, if I can do it and drag it up. Okay. I came as close to. Yeah. Now, you wanted pink, didn't you? Sorry. I think it may be pink printed, but so taking it, the biggest thing here is probably taking in the balance of the Glen Iris neighborhood, or almost all the balance of the Glen Iris neighborhood, which had been split by I-65. There is this little trace in which is basically highway. So the Glen Iris neighborhood there, and but again, maintaining, I think, through Forest Park, Highland Park, through the Redmont area, and into Glen Iris, with the southern part of the 5 Points South neighborhood, which again is a very large geographic neighborhood. 3 into compliance. 4, we have to go north 4, so pardon me, and okay. God, even that didn't get it in there. 4 needed some population growth. Maintained certainly the population core of the district as is. This was also part of 4. These are less densely populated areas, even though the geography is there. And I guess to the north. There we go. That's where 4 is gaining population here by taking in some of what was originally part of District 1, or currently is part of District 1. Madam President, people can stop for, however you want to handle questions.
Yes, at this time, are there any questions? I know we've gone over a few of those. Just any thoughts or observations, councilors, at this point, or we'll just go ahead, Councilor Moore.
I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one who, had some different changes. So in the event that, we see some areas where we kind of want to make some edits, How does that process? How do we go about handling that process?
Well, yes, what the committee has set aside, and one of the items on our agenda would be that we know this is your first time seeing since your initial one-on-one. We've incorporated another opportunity for you to debrief and to talk with the consultant, and that will be February 9th and 10th.
Got it.
And so we'll go through some of the same process that we had before in setting that up and allowing that so that you can digest and look at what, has occurred since your initial meeting. And of course, you were at one-on-one and may have walked out as I did with an understanding of what you had prioritized and what you had asked. And then after the other 8 counselors had their opportunity to talk, then that may have made some changes. So that will be our next direction. Okay?
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Turner.
And again, we needed to get to a conforming draft map, right? I mean, when last anyone looked at it, it was non-conforming. The districts, many of them were out of balance of the one person, one vote. We have a conforming one following. Okay, so I will go to 5 quickly. Hold on one sec. Five was above 100%, and 5, most importantly, I think, was a district that ran, from east to west, essentially in the city, and knowing that the 2 districts that were most overpopulated were in the extreme east of the city, and the 2 districts that were most underpopulated were in the extreme west of the city. Changes to 5 were probably greater changes than in any other district, quite honestly. So this is where, again, District 5 in the west, it had parts of it going to District 9, which we'll go over in a second, and part to 8, but maintaining a footprint still to the west of Interstate 65, coming down through the central city, North Avondale, South Side. I think the core here is relatively unchanged, and the counselor may wish to take exception with that. Specifically, East Avondale, that was split because we have this very strange kind of L that dropped down, I believe was in Councilor Abbott's district, here picking that up for 5. And 5 needed to go to gain additional population, to go north a bit, and again, taking some of that from 2, primarily through the Southeast Lake neighborhood. But as you can see, well, maybe you can't see on this, I'm not sure, but it's major thoroughfares. Even when a neighborhood is divided, we look for major thoroughfares as best as possible that fit along with blocks to do that. 6. Oh boy. Core of 6 through Woodland Park, through North and South Titusville, through Mason City, stayed very much the same here. It took in more of 5 Points South, and again, as discussed when we were talking about 3, the balance of the Glen Iris neighborhood on the west of 65 had been in 6, which is why you're picking up more of the 5 Points South area on this side of 65. It's 6 major major change there anyway. 7. Seven actually was in compliance, so this is much more of a cleanup activity here, which this is an interesting thing in many people's district. There's a piece of the Powderly neighborhood like right in the middle, and it's like 3 square blocks. It's unincorporated Birmingham, and many of you have those in yours. And we drill down to it. There are a couple houses there. I mean, so why it's unincorporated Birmingham, no idea. But where you see, in this case, that hole, and another one here, but this has homes. Yes, yeah, you must want it. Oh yeah, yep. It does, it'll move it a little bit, yeah. So this part of Powderly here, and again, you've got some holes here that are just not incorporated Birmingham, but the major cleanup here, I think, was the Powderly neighborhood had been split, and this brings it together. Not substantial in 7 as a change. Now we'll go to 8. Eight needed to gain population. 8 gained population by picking up the Thomas neighborhood is split between 8 and 9. Picked up a little there. Picked up College Hills. Graymont had been split, I believe, so picked up the entirety of the Graymont neighborhood here, and maintained the Tuxedo neighborhood. I can tell you these are great examples of how weird blocks are, okay, versus like, it'd be ideal to have an Inslee neighborhood that doesn't have that in a very small population, but it's just they're connected to blocks in Tuxedo, in the Tuxedo neighborhood. So I think that's the primary change to 8, those 3. And those are going to be south. Hold on a second. Correct. It did. And this is one of the, so you will see this occasionally when we get to blocks. I mean, where the neighborhoods have been drawn along what is still a major thoroughfare, you're much more likely to get a block that corresponds to that. And so that is possible in some places. The numbers that I know you've seen, since 8 and 9 were the most underpopulated to start with, we tried to get the population clearly below the 105 threshold, but still having some room there. And then now let's go to 9. I'm not sure I can get all of 9. That may be the easiest way to do it. I apologize. I truly apologize. We'll go out there in just a second. Needed to gain the most. Again, picked up the Druid Hills neighborhood. Picked up this was a probably 70-30 split of North Birmingham. So again, using major blocks followed pretty well here. In North Birmingham, so pushing that there. Even the Fountain Heights neighborhood, which is split, it's split right along 2059, okay? So there's a real known demarcation where we have to split where we have to split one. Trying to think through. There may have been a few additional blocks in Inslee that had been in 8 that were allocated to 9. Have to go back and look at the old map for that. Okay. Okay. So, just to get, yeah, I'm going to try and this is available again, you can see that kind of the reason this ends up being part of the Tuxedo neighborhood I'm sorry, not the Tuxedo neighborhood, please forgive me, but that the block logically came from there is there aren't very many residential streets in this area compared to this. So this is a block, basically. So it was split one or take a little bit of the other. And here, again, it's not the population center that you get as you go further to the west in Inslee. I'm sure I've missed something, but.
Oh, I thank you, and I know the counselors are digesting this information and they're trying to, again, they're seeing the entire picture versus what they saw with their one-on-ones. Counselors, did you have any questions at this point or any comments? Yes, sir, Counselor Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. First of all, I want to thank you two gentlemen for y'all's work last week. And Doug, I hope you weren't working all weekend on the map. I do thank y'all for y'all's work, and I think that this is a really good starting point. I do want to point out that I do think that there might be, well, first of all of us have been really good, I think, about making sure that we're on, if some of us got to lose population, we got to lose it. If some of us got to gain it, we got to gain it. So I think that we're all cohesively working well together. But I am concerned a little bit about District 5. And I'm going to obviously let Councilor O'Quinn speak to that. It is his district. But, I do think that the city of Birmingham is evolving where we have a very strong city center. And I do think that it is very logical that that is represented in our districts and in voting and in representation. And it's not because he came and gobbled up a lot of my district in the east side, but I really feel that, I sincerely feel that way. And I think that then 9 of us, or whichever one, it might affect all 9 of us, I don't know, owe it to Councilor O'Quinn to kind of keep some sort of consistency for his district. So I don't know what that looks like in terms of give and take, but I do think that our city center is finally becoming its own again, and so that should be reflected in these districts.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Quinn, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was pretty shocked when I saw this last night. it's actually hard to find, a neighborhood in this draft map that's bordered, on three sides, with other neighborhoods that are in District 5. It's this is an overgeneralization, but it's, a chain of neighborhoods side by side by side. So anyway, I definitely would, like to suggest some adjustments. One thing that would be very helpful in making those suggestions is if we had the capacity to see where the population is. I asked about this in the last meeting that we had, if there was some type of heat map for the blocks that you're referring to, just so, that would make it easier for us to visualize, of course, but if it's straight up numbers for each census block, then we can work with that as well. But yes, I'm definitely feeling stretched.
We can provide, there are population numbers for each block. Many blocks have 0 people in them, honestly. And I think that as many have commented, they thought that the existing District 5 might be larger, right, when the census count, might have a higher count when the census came out. Remind you that the question that people were asked was, where do you live as of April 1, 2020? So we're now dealing with data that's almost 2 years old. And I know that many of the development patterns you're both talking about have been going on longer than that. But
Thanks, Councilor. I agree with everything that Doug said, and want to respect, of course, the feedback we've gotten about the district. I just want to note, one of the things that we didn't get a chance to talk a little bit about, and I'm happy to do that globally about this map, is, of course, we're balancing a lot of different considerations. And one of the issues we were looking at, and that, you'll recall, one of our exchanges was about the stretching of your district as it currently sits. It goes east and west. And balancing the population considerations plus the issue of making sure that each district maintains its current representation does create a bit of a challenge, and I think this is one way we tried to resolve it, but I definitely see that there are other options we can talk through. But in order to make that shift of the population take account of the growth in the east and the loss of population, or at least the slower growth in the west, is probably fair to say. Your district is unfortunately one of those that does have to engage with some sort of change, and as you said, we can talk through different ways in order to figure out how that change works best. But the east-west configuration is still, part of the district, and I guess the question is sort of what might be the most favorable version of it. And I think, as we want to talk through it further, we can kind of explore different options. But certainly, as Doug said, the heat map population issue is always something that's available, and we can, make that available to you to kind of play around with. Just note, of course, all of these things are interactive, right? As you move one thing, we have to think about others. And, right in the middle of the city, as you all can see from the map, is a lot of sensitive area that if we're committed to maintaining representation in each district, we, have some choices to make. And so we're happy to talk through that going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Creighton. And we have placed within the packet that we've provided are the guidelines that we did approve during council and committee of the whole. And it looked at each of the guidelines that govern this process for developing the map. So I do feel a sense of cooperation, if that will help you at all, Councilor Quinn, and where other councilors who are, affected by the changes or near the changes that affect you, I think everybody wants to help out and ensure that the districts, again, make those numbers, and we're placing neighborhoods and we're placing boundaries according to what meets these guidelines. But I do know I've heard among councilors some consideration and wanting to help to assist that. I think Councilor Smitherman and I have already been talking about some of the things we might like to see on that next reiteration. So, and I do feel that you have some councilors that want to commit and work with you on that. Yes, sir, go ahead.
So I'm curious about, this is kind of where the process starts, but there's, also has to be opportunity for the neighborhoods themselves to engage in this process, and where does that part come in to all of this?
I'm going to offer just a couple of thoughts, and of course, a lot of this is I'm going to have to defer to the council and the president about how the process goes on from here. But one of the expectations is at some point we get information from the public in terms of feedback about what counts as communities of interest or not. As the guidelines say, neighborhoods are sort of, one sort of built-in version of a community of interest, but they mean something. Doug has said this in different points in his presentation. Neighborhoods mean one thing in one part of the city and another elsewhere, and so understand that the difference partly is informed by you all, and in part, I assume, from the neighborhoods and the voters who live there themselves. So my sense would be that once something is filed, there will be an opportunity for some public engagement, and what form that takes, I think, is it's up to, I defer to you all to tell me what makes the most sense. I'm happy to make recommendations, but it's a choice that I am going to be guided by your preferences.
Thank you, Dr. Creighton. Just to follow up on what Dr. Creighton has said, from the committee, our plan had been to provide this first look today. Then we would go back, and now that you've seen the city as a whole, now we would have the individual debriefings among councilors, and that with the individual councilor with the consultants, and that would be February 9th and 10th. And if you don't require that consultation, let us know, and then that'll help them in scheduling that. Then under other item C of new business, the committee, one of our guidelines in the ordinance does require us to present a draft map to the city clerk. And then we would vote on that draft map, and it also includes the public input. And what we've been looking at as a committee is some type of a hybrid to allow that public input. And as you can see, we've placed maps out in the chambers today that will also be available for public input. So the hybrid would include, you'll be able to have these paper versions of the map. There will also be a landing or a electronic page where citizens will able to go, and you'll be able to manipulate some of the things that you've seen us do technically here today with that landing page. And so we'll let you know when that electronic version becomes available, and then there will be the public meeting as well. And that thing, Dr. Creighton, be sure I'm right with what I'm saying. Thank you.
Oh, that's a wonderful recitation. I just thought it might be useful for the committee and the council to hear a couple of other global comments about the map, and I promise not to
that's okay.
Go farther than my welcome allows. But I thought it would be useful to talk a little bit about the way in which the guidelines match up to the draft you're seeing, recognizing there'll be more feedback, but just so that you all hear at least once how that analysis works. Doug mentioned earlier, we obviously are guided by the one person, one vote principle, that districts need to be roughly equal. We stayed within the guidelines, which offer us plus or minus 5%. The most variant district, the one that's farthest off of the ideal in this map, is 3.5%, so we're well within that. Again, leaving room for us to have further conversation as needed. We also, of course, have a commitment to comply with the existing laws, federal and state law, particularly with respect to race equity. And I thought it'd be worth talking through that, and I'll happy to go deeper in, but at least to give a summary of that. We're guided by, of course, a history in this state and in this city of challenges with recognizing equal treatment under the law. We have federal laws that are in place to assure that we respect everybody's opportunity to elect candidates. generally, and I'm synthesizing a lot of law, we want to make sure two things don't happen. One, that we don't overly concentrate voters by race in any given district, and then we also don't disperse them in a way that would prevent a racial group from electing a candidate of choice. And in this state in particular, for African Americans, that's a sensitive question to think about how African Americans are grouped together. We don't look at it purely on grounds of race to supplant other principles. That would also be a violation of law. We look at it in conjunction with the other guidelines. I'm confident we've done that here, in part because we have a map that maintains roughly the racial balances that existed prior to now. There is some evidence of polarized voting throughout the state. Here it's not as prominent as you might find elsewhere, but it would justify the balance that currently exists. There are 7 of 9 districts that are currently African American majorities in terms of voting age population. That continues. The precise percentages differ slightly. District 3 is a little bit higher. District 2 is now a little bit lower under this proposal. But again, the majorities stay where they are. And that in part is due to the changes we made with respect to neighborhoods. We've tried to bring more neighborhoods and tracts together. We organize things that need to move in terms of population, but overall that is maintained. The next thing to talk about is compactness and contiguity. These districts are slightly more compact than before. That's an improvement over the existing map. You saw in basically many of those jagged edges we removed in order to try to bring a little bit of more sensibility to the way in which divisions occurred. As Doug mentioned, we now have divisions on highways, as opposed to things that might have to be described as meets and bounds. You don't ever really want to get that. That's useful from a practical standpoint. It just bears noting here, obviously for you all, you want to think about ways in which you serve your constituents. So knowing who's calling you and who's in your district and who's not is important. From the voter's perspective as well, right? It's important for them to know how to organize and whom to call when they've got a challenge. So this map, in ways that we've talked about, gives a little bit more direction and clarity for people where they live. We think that's a good thing. I hope you all do as well. But that has, in fact, helped along in our measures of compactness. The districts are contiguous, right? Taking account of the holes that are in the city boundaries, the districts all touch each other. You don't have to lift a pencil to get from one district to another. So that's from one part of the district to another. So that's a good thing. And then finally, as I said earlier, the middle of the city in particular is one of those areas where maintaining the representation has been a bit more challenging than normal because a lot of people live close to each other. And in some cases, as in District 2, the council member and the Board of Education member live pretty far away from each other. But notwithstanding all that, it was fairly easy with these adjustments to maintain everyone in their current districts, and that's out of respect to the fact that you just had a citywide election, and of course we had a weird story of the census being reported a lot more late than it normally would. So we think on balance this achieves a good representation of each of these guidelines. I like to say this, I'll share it here. In redistricting, there are 2 polar ends, one where you've got the Disney standard, you walk into the Magic Kingdom and you're ecstatically happy, and there's the other end of it where you're irreconcilably unhappy, and our goal is to hit somewhere between those, ideally moving towards the ecstatically happy. We won't hit either of those if we're lucky, but our goal is in this conversation to get us as far to that as we can, making sure that we're complying with existing law. So I thought it was just useful at least to run down how each of these guidelines match up. Eventually, once we file something, there'll be a narrative, right, that goes along with that for the public to see and for you all to see a description of each district and how it complies with the guidelines. But I thought it would be useful to run through that just now. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, and appreciate you reviewing that information or providing that for us, because now we're looking at it or listening to this with having a map in front of us, and so we know how those guidelines will really drive the remainder of this process when we go into the second round of looking at our maps. So, committee members, I'd like to ask if we could select and we agree on our next steps would be the individual district debriefings that we're scheduling for February 9th and 10th. Second. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. So that will be our next move, council, to allow that opportunity, and then that time we'll come back and entertain, and the next step then would be providing, filing that as required by ordinance, and then obtaining the public information. Any questions at this point? Yes, sir, Councilor Woods.
Just a comment. I did get some neighborhood leaders reach out and did want to kind of participate on some level, so did want to kind of make sure we have some sort of process for that. So I guess once that's figured out, let me know so we can share that information.
We'll definitely do that. Thank you. It's important to us. As you can see, there will be some neighborhoods, and we've tried to compact that and make that as logical as possible. So there are some few changes in, again, trying to align those neighborhoods where there's representation, in most cases, singly by a councilor, or if not, in some, I think we may have had 3 and 4 that were splitting between districts. So we're trying to look at those. So yes, there will be, we are looking for that voice as well as part of that public input. Thank you, Councilor. Any other questions? We don't have any old business, so I will move for adjournment.
Just one quick thing, though.
Sorry.
It came up earlier during this meeting that that I probably will have to lose East Lake Park no matter what, but will we be having the fishing rodeo? And the answer is yes. We will still have the fishing rodeo, whether it's in my district or not. I was asked that earlier. And so whoever gets that, you have to work with me on that.
All right. Go ahead, Councilor.
So, just a quick question. This is going to be a transition for everybody to figure out. So, once we arrive on a map that we all agree upon, I know that in terms of voting, it really doesn't go effect until that 2025 election. So is that the official date that the map changes, or, you know, what from summer of 2022 to summer of 2025, will neighborhoods know who to call?
And I'm going to ask two things. We may have to also call in our city attorney, Julie Bernard, and Dr. Creighton, because I just want to be sure we are clear on what would be the uses of the new map as far as elections are concerned, and any subsequent elections between now and 2025, and the other question about the neighborhoods, but more the use of the map for subsequent elections. And
We still vote to adopt it.
right, we would still have to vote to adopt it as a council, but
Once it's adopted, it's adopted.
then there are changes that occur. Go ahead, Dr. Creighton, just restate.
Sure. I will note, and I thank the president for the reminder. So the city attorney and we have been in conversation about the proper application of the law. Our approach to this using our guidelines is that the intention is for this map to have essentially immediate effect upon adoption. However, that means a couple of things given other laws, and I can talk in depth about it, but essentially what we're taking the view of is that in 2025, the next regularly scheduled election, a map adopted in this process would have effect. There, of course, are unforeseen things that might require an election, before that time, preceding that moment. And so the maps, once adopted, in effect, we would formulate the ordinance, and it's a conversation between the city attorney and us about how to recommend this to work out in practice. But essentially, the next regularly scheduled election for this city would be November 2022. And if there should be a vacancy for any reason at all, that in that election, these maps would apply. Does that partly answer the question? That is, if there's a special election that's necessary.
And Ms. Bernard is approaching as well, just to be sure.
Okay.
But go ahead. We'll be sure we're in
But
agreement.
just to correct something that you said, so November of 2022, these districts have no relevance there.
Oh, that's correct. I'm suggesting one potential exception to the rule. Generally speaking, yes.
Okay.
There is no citywide election currently scheduled for November 22. However, and I'll defer more to the city attorney, but just to say, existing law, in the case that there's a special election required to fill a vacancy, exception to the rule, that would happen in November 2022. And in November 2022, if that should be the time that this election occurs, a map adopted through this process would apply. So I think all of that is to say the adoption of this map should essentially have immediate, I think you should think about the way in which over the next, say, 4 years that you should start engaging with neighborhoods that are under the new maps that are adopted, that those would be the relationships that you would want to develop over the next 4 years. Election-wise, there are going to be some specifics about how to conduct yourselves about who is, if there's a vacancy, how the vacancy will be handled, but the thrust of the point is that the new districts would be in effect in the case that, one, in 2025, the regularly scheduled election, the election occurs under the new maps. Two, if there's a vacancy for any reason between now and 2025, that an election that is held would be held under the new district maps.
And Attorney Bernard, do you have anything to add or just?
See, is this on?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I'll read you what the city code, the ordinance says. It says, such redistricting ordinance shall not apply to any regular or special municipal election held within 6 months after its becoming effective or until necessary approval of preclearance, which doesn't exist now, has been obtained. And then then it says no incumbent council member shall be deprived of the member's unexpired term of office because of such redistricting. So, as Dr. Creighton, explained, under the current Mayor-Council Act, if there's a vacancy in the council appoints someone to fill that vacancy until the next election of any kind at which the city electors are qualified voters. And that we have interpreted that, and we've gotten an Attorney General's opinion that would mean any election where even if it's for one council district, all the electors of the city would need to be qualified voters. So that could be a state or county special election at which all the city, would be voting, or, and that includes, and we have tried to avoid this in many circumstances, where it would be, as Dr. Creighton said, the next scheduled election would be actually could be the primaries, that are coming up. So this wouldn't apply for 6 months. So it wouldn't apply to the primaries that are coming up. But then the next scheduled election right now is the November 2022 election. Now, for reasons under election law, it doesn't save the city anything to hold an election in conjunction with a state election, and it can become confusing to voters. For state, county elections, the records of elections, the ballots and everything are stored with the sheriff. For a municipal election, they're stored with the city clerk. So you can't just have one machine and run ballots through. You have to have separate machines, separate workers, separate sign-ins, and that can become very confusing. So we try to avoid having tacking a city election. We have done some special council elections in conjunction with a state election. But, if it gets beyond having more than one district involved, it could get very confusing for voters. So.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that clarification from both Dr. Creighton and Ms. Bernard. Councilors, are we ready to entertain a motion?
Second.
Wait a minute.
Never mind.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to know about the school board representatives. I don't see any of them here unless I can't recognize them because of masks. And so I wanted to know how they're being informed.
Yes, we will share this information. They were invited to the last meeting, and we wanted to go through this reiteration with the council, so we will share this information with them, and we'll invite them to our next meeting as well.
Okay, and the scheduling of our appointments, we just get with the gentleman and do it either on the 9th or 10th?
The deputy, the administration, Ms. Kidd and Mr. McDaniels, they'll handle that as they did the last set, and so they'll set that schedule up and then get your approval as to whether or not that's a good time and date for you.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Thank you all very much. I do want to, before I end, I don't think I've said enough, thank you to our consultants for the work that you've done, and thank you, counselors and the committee. We appreciate all of the input where we've used to reach to this point. And so for the public, just want to let you know, we will be providing you with this information, and we will be wanting to hear from you and get your feedback as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.